Hey guys, tonight we ease into a slower rhythm, drifting back more than 2,000 years, into a city that never really sleeps, but somehow always yawns. Pataliputra, capital of Ashoka's empire. You're there, right in the middle of it, listening to the half-muffled bustle that leaks through the palace walls before the sun even rises. Vendors already clatter pots. Oxen shuffle along the muddy streets, and someone is probably trying to sell you something loud enough to pierce even your dream state. You can almost smell the smoke from dung fires mixing with the sweetness of boiled jaggery. And yes, you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes without modern plumbing. So a little reality check. Being born in the 3rd century BCE wasn't the romantic Instagram filter you might imagine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you, because it's fun picturing all these sleepy travelers scattered across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The palace corridors echo with sandalwood smoke and the scuff of bare feet. Servants whisper as they open heavy shutters, letting in a stripe of pink dawn that cuts across the polished stone floor. You rise, or rather, you are lifted into the day by the hum of the capital itself. Pataliputra stretches for miles, protected by timber palisades. And out beyond the palace you can picture rows of tiled roofs, bustling markets, and the river Ganges glittering like a silver vein. Historians still argue whether the city truly held hundreds of thousands, or if the numbers are inflated like a fisherman's tale. But the consensus is clear. This was one of the largest urban centers of its time. Your first sensations are not of glory, but of weight. The humid air clings to your skin, heavy with last night's incense and the faint odor of elephants penned nearby. Imagine trying to get back to sleep with elephants rumbling like bass speakers just outside your window. Ashoka himself probably didn't mind. Power has a way of making you comfortable with chaos, but you're more of a white noise app on low volume kind of listener. You hear the palace rooster crow, though the rooster is probably ceremonial at this point, because everyone already knows the schedule. You shuffle down the corridor, guided by attendants, feet brushing cold stone. The palace design itself is a hybrid curiosity. Greek influences with columned halls, Persian touches in the carved capitals, and deeply Indian flourishes of lotus and lion motifs. That lion, by the way, will eventually end up on the national emblem of modern India, one of history's longest-running brand placements. But let's linger in the sensory side of it. You touch the rough wooden doors, see oil lamps still guttering even as sunlight creeps in. Hear the low call of conch shells echoing across the courtyards. Priests chant somewhere distant. The sounds blur together, like the first few minutes after your alarm clock, when your brain is not sure whether it's dreaming or checking email. One mainstream fact here: Ashoka came to power after a famously bloody struggle, even reportedly killing his own brothers to secure the throne. But that's not what you feel right now. You feel the lingering calm of a ruler who's been in power for years. Someone who has shifted from the raw scramble of ambition into the ritual comfort of routine. A quirky tidbit slips in. The city was said to have secret passages running under the palaces, partly for defense and partly for dramatic exits. So if you ever wanted to vanish from an awkward breakfast meeting, history had already built you a trapdoor. As you stand by the latticed window, dawn spreads over the capital. The Ganges mist curls like a blanket over the water. You see fishermen casting nets, small boats loaded with rice and spices, drifting slowly downstream. The scale of it all is dizzying. Caravans arriving from Afghanistan, rumors of Greek envoys, and somewhere, a sweating scribe carving Ashoka's proclamations into slabs of stone. The noise of the street filters in, merchants hawking, ox carts creaking, children laughing. You can almost feel the grit of dust in your teeth. The king's city doesn't run on silence, it runs on motion. And in that motion you sense both comfort and exhaustion. Being emperor means your alarm clock isn't your own, it's the sound of 1 million people depending on you. Your attendants bring a cloth soaked in cool water. You dab your face, blinking against the sticky heat. Maybe you chuckle. If Ashoka had had access to an air conditioner, half of India's history might have been written with fresher handwriting. But instead you've got palm leaf fans waving gently, the rhythm hypnotic, making your eyelids heavier just as the day officially begins. This is how dawn in Pataliputra feels, alive, relentless, and slightly absurd. The emperor's daily routine is not a sprint but a slow river, and you're just now wading in ankle deep. You sense the world stretching before you, a schedule that will carry you from sacred baths to stone-carved decrees, from diplomatic banquets to mosquito-ridden meditations. The day promises both the profound and the faintly ridiculous, and your role is to drift with it, letting the city breathe you awake. You shuffle barefoot toward the river, still half wrapped in the drowsy warmth of the palace, but already bracing for the shock of cold water. The Ganges is not just a river here, it's a living sacred artery of the empire. Priests say it washes away sin, and even Ashoka, ruler of a realm stretching across most of the subcontinent, can't start the day without its icy blessing. So you follow the servants down stone steps slick with dew, listening to the faint chorus of chants floating over the water. The city wakes around you. Fishermen are already tugging at their nets, their voices carrying across the mist. Women balance brass pots on their heads, skirts brushing damp sand, laughing softly at some shared joke. Cows wander stubbornly near the ghats, swishing tails at invisible flies. You catch whiffs of smoke from cooking fires. Lentils, sesame oil, a hint of fried bread, and it mixes with the earthy scent of river mud. It's oddly soothing, like a chaotic breakfast buffet you're not allowed to touch yet. The attendants step carefully, carrying small jars of fragrant oils and baskets of flowers for ritual offerings. The emperor's routine isn't just about cleanliness, it's about choreography. Every move must be a gesture, every splash a symbol. Historians still argue whether Ashoka himself was a devout early riser, or whether this was more of a staged performance, an emperor flexing his piety in front of his people. But in this moment for you, the debate doesn't matter. You feel the stone chill beneath your feet and hear the slap of water against the steps. You approach the edge. The Ganges gleams pale gray, reflecting a sky just starting to blush. A priest sprinkles drops across your forehead, murmuring syllables you can barely follow, and you wade in. The shock is instant. Cold seizes your skin and you gasp. But then something else happens. The weight of the sticky air lifts. The water clings tight, cleansing not just dust but sleep itself. Imagine diving into an ice bath before coffee. It's brutal, it's bracing, and suddenly you're awake whether you like it or not. A mainstream fact slips in. Ritual bathing in the Ganges has been part of Indian spiritual life for millennia, tied to purification, worship, and the cycles of rebirth. Ashoka, after converting to Buddhism, didn't abandon these rituals. Instead, he wove them into his public image, showing himself as both emperor and humble devotee. A quirkier tidbit. Ancient texts mention that crocodiles sometimes lurked in the quieter bends of the river. Picture it. You're trying to wash away sin, and instead you're wondering if your leg just brushed against salvation or dinner. No wonder Ashoka's attendants likely scouted ahead. The water numbs your toes, then your knees, then your waist. The priest instructs you to scoop the river in cupped hands. Let it fall over your head. Droplets run down your back, dripping into the current. The chants intensify, joined by conch shells that blast like foghorns across the mist. You almost laugh. Imagine trying to sleep through that racket if you lived in a riverside hut. Still, there's something deeply hypnotic here. The rhythm of splashing, the drone of the priests, the repetition of breath. You sense why emperors and beggars alike came to the water. It's not about cleanliness, not really. It's about surrender. You let go, letting the current tug at your robe. Your eyes wander up to the opposite bank. There, traders are already staking out space for stalls. Bolts of silk rolled out like rainbow ribbons. Baskets of pomegranates piled high. Pots of turmeric glowing golden in the dawn. Pataliputra is alive with commerce, even here at the river. If you squint, you might even spot a Greek envoy peering at the ritual, wondering if his toga counts as proper swimwear. Historians still argue whether Ashoka bathed in private or deliberately made these rituals public, ensuring word spread of his devotion. After all, emperors don't waste opportunities for PR. You, meanwhile, just try not to sneeze as a breeze cuts across the wet cloth clinging to your skin. Finally, attendants guide you out of the river. Towels, rough cotton, damp from the morning air, wrap around your shoulders. Oils of sesame and sandalwood are rubbed into your skin, not just to warm you, but to mask the faint river funk clinging to your hair. You step back onto the stone ghats dripping, listening to the swirl of voices and bells behind you. The city is fully awake now. As you walk back toward the palace, droplets trail behind you. Tiny footprints that fade into the dust. Your senses sharpen. The sound of wheels creaking under carts, the call of monkeys scrambling along rooftops, the sharp spice of clove drifting from a nearby stall. Bathing wasn't just a ritual. It was the emperor's way of syncing his pulse with the heartbeat of his empire. By the time you return to the palace corridors, the sun has risen fully, flooding the courtyard with gold. The cool river lingers on your skin, and you feel both refreshed and faintly amused. You've just taken a sacred plunge in one of history's most important rivers, and somehow you manage to dodge crocodiles and stomach cramps. Not a bad start. Back inside the palace, you're still dripping faintly when a small army of attendants closes in, armed with cloths, powders, and jars of fragrant paste. This is the part of the day that feels less like spirituality and more like a backstage makeup session before a theater performance. Ashoka's body, and by extension yours in this little time-slip role, isn't just a body, it's a billboard. You can't just wander into meetings with generals and monks looking like you rolled out of bed. No, you have to gleam like an advertisement for empire. The first thing you notice is the scent. A sharp sweetness of sandalwood fills the air as a servant smears a cool paste across your arms and chest. It tingles slightly, leaving a faint golden sheen that makes your skin look healthier than you feel. Other attendants dab jasmine oil onto your temples, and one slightly over-enthusiastic helper waves incense directly under your nose, leaving you coughing politely. Historians still argue whether these rituals were meant for genuine hygiene or mostly for ceremonial pomp. But either way, you can't deny it beats deodorant commercials. Here's the mainstream fact. Ancient Indian elites used a variety of natural perfumes and cosmetics, from sandalwood paste to rosewater. Ashoka's court, dripping with resources from across the empire, would have had the best of them, imported if necessary from distant trade routes that stretched all the way to Persia. These scents weren't frivolous. They carried connotations of status, purity, even religious devotion, Now for the quirky tidbit. Some accounts suggest crocodile dung was once used in cosmetic or medicinal concoctions, believed to protect against sunburn. Imagine rubbing that in before strolling into a cabinet meeting. Majesty, you smell earthy today. No wonder sandalwood paste won the popularity contest. You sit patiently, or at least you try, while attendants paint subtle designs on your skin with turmeric and vermilion. These aren't tattoos, they'll wash off by the evening, but they're part of the Emperor's morning transformation, a ritual layering of symbols. Spirals for the wheel of Dharma, lotuses for purity, faint lines that frame your eyes to make you look more commanding. Think of it as the original Instagram filter, only without the option to swipe away a mistake. While you're being powdered and perfumed, you overhear palace gossip floating between attendants. A cousin squabbled over land near Taxila. An envoy from the west brought strange fruits. Someone swears they saw a monk levitate during meditation, though another servant insists it was just a trick involving ropes. You let these half-whispers wash over you. They're like the palace's own white noise machine, buzzing along as your body is polished into imperial presentation. Your skin feels tacky from the layers of paste. Your hair slicked with coconut oil until it gleams. You catch a glimpse of yourself in a polished bronze mirror, still slightly distorted, but enough to recognize the transformation. The sleepy, river-damp figure from earlier has been replaced by someone sharper, shinier, more commanding. You wonder how much of Ashoka's authority came not from armies or edicts, but from this performance of presence, this careful cultivation of image. Historians still argue whether Ashoka personally enjoyed such rituals or endured them out of necessity. Some suggest that after his conversion to Buddhism, he might have found vanity distasteful. Others counter that Buddhism never erased the reality of kingship. The emperor still had to project power, still had to shine like a walking symbol of stability. You sit there half amused, half dazzled, trying to decide which side of the debate feels more true. By the time the final touches are applied, tiny dots of kohl at the corners of your eyes, a smear of saffron along the brow, you feel almost weightless or maybe just overwhelmed by the scents. It's like being inside a perfume shop where every tester was sprayed at once. Still, there's something strangely calming in the ritual repetition. Every morning, the same pastes, the same powders, the same transformation. It's routine as much as rule. You stretch your arms, testing the way the paste cracks slightly, and step toward the doorway. Outside, the palace hums with its usual tempo. Ministers already lining up with petitions, guards adjusting their spears, peacocks shrieking from the gardens. The world may expect the emperor to deliver decrees and judgments, but the emperor also smells faintly of jasmine and looks like a living icon. And somewhere, probably down by the Ghats, some ordinary man just bathed in the same river, dried off in the same sun, and went about his day without sandalwood paste or saffron. You feel the contrast, the absurdity of it, and maybe, just maybe, you're grateful you're the one with access to perfume instead of crocodile dung. Now that your skin glistens with oils and pastes, it's time for the next transformation. The armor of silk and gold. Attendants sweep in with folded garments stacked high like an offering to the gods, their fabrics shimmering in the filtered sunlight that sneaks through carved screens. You sigh quietly. This is not a quick throw on jeans and a t-shirt kind of morning. Dressing as an emperor is a full-scale event, somewhere between a wedding and a Broadway costume change. They begin with the innermost layer, a light cotton tunic, soft against the skin but already clinging in the sticky air. Over it comes the silk robe, dyed in rich reds and deep indigos, colors that scream wealth because the dyes themselves are imported, expensive, and painstaking to produce. The cloth rustles as it drapes over your shoulders, heavy enough to remind you of the responsibility you're carrying, though. Honestly, it's also heavy enough just on its own. Imagine trying to hold a serious conversation while sweating through layers that weigh as much as your average gym bag. Here's the mainstream fact. Mauryan royalty often wore fine silks and muslins, sometimes embroidered with gold thread. Trade routes through Central Asia and beyond fed the court's appetite for luxury fabrics, and the emperor had first pick. Clothes weren't just clothes. They were a visible declaration of empire's reach. Then the attendants bring out the jewelry. Gold bangles slide onto your wrists, cool at first, then quickly warming against your pulse. A heavy necklace studded with precious stones rests on your chest. It's dazzling, but it drags at your neck like an anchor. One servant tilts your head just enough to secure a jewel in your hair, while another attaches rings that glint in the rising light. Historians still argue whether Ashoka himself favored extravagance after his Buddhist conversion, or whether such displays were reserved mostly for state functions. Some suggest he might have chosen simpler attire later in life, while others note that appearances had to be maintained regardless of his personal taste. The quirky tidbit: some jewelry of the time doubled as portable savings accounts, hollow bangles that could store small valuables, or rings with compartments for herbs or even tiny notes. Imagine carrying your emergency snacks inside your bracelet. You almost wish your necklace came with a secret compartment for a midday cookie. You stand there as attendants fuss with pleats, adjusting the folds so they cascade perfectly down your side. The rope is secured with a sash embroidered in golden lotuses. From behind, a servant tucks in a ceremonial dagger, not really practical for combat, more like the ancient equivalent of a fashion accessory. It glimmers, but you silently admit you'd be useless if someone actually challenged you to a duel right now. Too many layers to move freely, too much fabric to even bend properly. The weight of it all settles in, the silk pressing against your shoulders, the jewelry tugging at your skin, the dagger digging slightly at your hip. This isn't comfort clothing. It's theater. You're a walking symbol, and every pleat and jewel is part of the performance. And yet there's a strange comfort in it. Like the perfume and pastes earlier, the ritual of dressing isn't just vanity, it's identity. By the time the last clasp is fastened, you no longer look like someone fumbling through dawn. You look like Ashoka, emperor of one of the greatest realms in ancient history. You glance at the bronze mirror again. The figure staring back is regal, layered, sparkling with power. The mirror's surface wavers slightly, distorting your reflection, but you see enough to know that the transformation is complete. The sleepy bather from the Ganges has been replaced by a figure draped in empire. Outside the chamber, you hear the faint murmur of ministers already gathering. The day is pulling you forward, step by step. Soon you'll sit through offerings, banquets and endless reports, but for now you stand still, feeling the weight of silk and the cool glint of gold, a living statue polished for display. And you can't help but think, modern rulers may have photo ops, press conferences and social media filters, but at least they don't have to wear 50 pounds of fabric in a tropical climate. In this battle of comfort, history definitely wins the least breathable outfit award. You are layered, perfumed, and glittering like a human chandelier, but the day cannot properly begin without one more ritual: offerings. You're guided into a side hall of the palace, cool and dim, where the air smells of ghee lamps and crushed blossoms. The floor is strewn with fresh marigold petals, soft against your sandals, and faint bells tinkle from the wrists of priests who shuffle forward with brass trays. The altar is modest in size but heavy in atmosphere. Small statues, Polished stones and bowls of rice and fruit piled carefully. An oil lamp flickers, casting long shadows that sway across carved pillars. The flames dance like tiny creatures, flickering alive in the dim hush. You lower yourself onto a cushion, your silks rustling, your bangles chiming faintly like background percussion. The mainstream fact: Mauryan rulers routinely performed daily offerings to both Vedic deities and local gods, even as Buddhism began to rise in influence. Ashoka himself, though famously turning toward Buddhism, never fully abandoned the ritual practices of his time. This overlap of devotion is what made his court both traditional and radical at once. He honored old gods while championing new philosophies. A priest steps forward, chanting in a measured drone. He sprinkles water from a conch shell over the offerings, then over you, droplets scattering cold on your warmed skin. Incense smoke coils upward in ribbons, filling your nose with a mix of frankincense and something earthier. Resin, perhaps, or the faint hint of burning grass. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some rituals in this period involved food offerings that priests later ate themselves. A very convenient system if you happen to be hungry and in charge of ritual distribution. You wonder if that towering pyramid of rice will really make it to the gods, or if it will quietly become someone's lunch. You're instructed to bow your head, so you do. The floor is cool beneath your fingertips. Priests chant louder now, voices overlapping as if they're weaving a net of sound around the space. You slip deeper into the rhythm, your breathing syncing with the slow cadence. The empire outside feels very far away. In this hall there is only the glow of lamps, the drone of mantras, the fragrance of smoke. Historians still argue whether Ashoka's devotions were heartfelt or calculated, whether he sought personal solace in these rituals, or simply used them as a way to display his piety before the court. But for you, kneeling in the warm haze of incense, it feels less like politics and more like surrender to a pattern older than kingship itself. One by one, offerings are lifted, blessed, and placed back down. Then a priest hands you a garland of jasmine, which you drape over a polished stone wheel, a symbol of Dharma that in centuries to come will be etched into India's very flag. You don't think about the future, though. You're too busy fighting the urge to sneeze as another cloud of incense smoke swirls right into your face. At the end of the ritual, a flame is circled before your forehead, its heat a sudden spark against your skin. You cup your hands to draw the warmth toward you, a symbolic blessing, then press them briefly to your eyes. The oil lamp gutters slightly, then steadies as if winking at you for your cooperation. When it's over, the hall is still. The priests step back. The piles of food remain, though you're fairly sure at least one priest is already eyeing the rice with practical hunger. You rise, joints stiff from kneeling, and your robes whisper against the stone floor. The offerings are done, the blessings gathered, and the Emperor's day is officially sanctified. Stepping back into the brighter courtyard, you feel the contrast. Outside, the sun is rising higher, the city roaring louder with carts, animals, and voices. Inside, it was shadow and quiet reverence. The two worlds tug at you, but both are part of your daily orbit. And as you walk toward breakfast, you can't help but smirk at the thought. Somewhere, far away, a modern person is microwaving their Pop-Tarts. You, on the other hand, just spent an hour offering fruit to the divine, only to leave it behind for the temple staff. Different times, same hunger. The scent of incense still clings to your robes as you make your way toward the breakfast chamber. Compared to the solemn hush of offerings, this room feels brighter, livelier, and far less forgiving to your growling stomach. The space is open to the courtyard, birds swooping lazily overhead, while attendants set down trays on polished low tables. Ministers are already gathering, murmuring in tight clusters, their voices carrying the particular energy of people who know they must talk to the emperor before he's had his morning meal. You lower yourself onto a cushion, careful not to wrinkle the silks, and survey the spread. Bowls of warm spiced milk steam gently, their surface swirling with saffron threads. Platters of flatbread glisten with ghee. Small heaps of sesame and jaggery sit nearby. And there's even a dish of mango slices, sweet, golden, and sticky enough to glue your fingers together for the rest of the day. Here's the mainstream fact. Meals in Ashoka's court leaned toward simple staples, especially after his turn toward Buddhism. But simplicity doesn't mean boring. Rice, lentils, vegetables, fruit, and dairy were flavored with pepper, cardamom, and cinnamon, imported from across the empire. Even plain food at this level carried the quiet weight of global trade routes. But before you can dig in, one of the senior ministers clears his throat. Of course, the emperor's breakfast is never just breakfast. It's a moving political forum. The men sit cross-legged, clutching scrolls, whispering into each other's ears before addressing you. A tax reform proposal here, a land dispute there, a report of bandits causing trouble on the western roads. You sip your spiced milk, half listening, half thinking about how this would be a lot easier with a noise-canceling headset. And now for the quirky tidbit, there's some evidence that certain ministers and nobles preferred to test the emperor's food for poison, not out of selfless loyalty, but because they considered it a perk to nibble the royal breakfast. Imagine someone casually eating your mango slices and calling it public service. The talk drifts between serious policy and not-so-serious gossip. One advisor mutters about a courtier who's supposedly training pigeons to deliver love notes. Another insists a Greek envoy was spotted looking scandalized at last night's elephant parade. You listen amused and let the chatter blend with the clinking of cups. Historians still argue whether Ashoka deliberately kept his breakfasts simple to set an example, or whether court chroniclers embellished his humility to make him look more virtuous. In either case, the meal before you is no royal feast of roasted boar and endless wine. It's a curated selection of nourishing, symbolically modest dishes. You finally tear into a piece of bread, dipping it into lentil stew, the flavors earthy and grounding. The ministers pause slightly, as though waiting for a sign. Your first bite is their green light to continue. You chew thoughtfully, pretending you're savoring policy as much as stew. The conversation slides from taxes to troop movements. A commander mentions the northern frontier, another the condition of roads leading to distant provinces. You nod, sip, and occasionally raise an eyebrow to keep them on their toes. Somewhere in the background, a peacock shrieks, and you wonder if it's secretly echoing your inner voice. Please, can we just eat first? Despite the interruptions, you settle into the rhythm. Bite of bread, sip of milk, nod at a minister. Repeat. It's like juggling breakfast and business in equal measure. And maybe that's the hidden art of being emperor, balancing nourishment and negotiation before the day has properly begun. By the time the dishes are cleared, you've had your fill of lentils, fruit, and politics. The ministers gather their scrolls, murmuring about who gets to speak next in the council chamber. You rise, wiping your hands on a damp cloth, and feel the shift in mood. Breakfast was the warm-up. The real weight of rulership is waiting in the halls ahead. Still, you can't help but chuckle to yourself. In a world where even your mango slices come with side orders of gossip and tax reform, maybe the simplest meal is also the most exhausting. The breakfast chamber fades behind you, replaced by the heavier air of the council hall. It's not oppressive in temperature so much as in atmosphere, like stepping into a courtroom where everyone has already prepared their arguments and you're the sole judge, jury, and reluctant therapist. The hall itself stretches long, columns etched with lotus motifs supporting the high roof, and woven mats cover the polished stone floor. Ministers, governors, and petitioners sit cross-legged in neat rows, their eyes flicking toward you with the sharpness of people rehearsing their speeches in their heads. You take your seat on a slightly raised platform, not a throne dripping in gold, but still unmistakably elevated. Cushions soften the posture, though the silks and jewelry you wear turn sitting into a kind of wrestling match with gravity. The attendants stand nearby, fanning slowly, and the buzzing of their palm fronds almost blends with the murmurs of the crowd. Almost. The first petitioner is a farmer, sunburnt, calloused, and visibly trembling. He speaks of a tax collector who demanded more than was due. You listen, tilting your head, the words tumbling in a dialect thicker than spiced milk. The ministers lean forward. Scribes scratch hurried notes on palm leaves. And you're aware of the tension. The emperor's decision could ruin or redeem the man's season. Here's the mainstream fact. Ashoka's council sessions were essential for governance. Land disputes, tax appeals, and petitions from ordinary citizens all found their way here. The Mauryan system of administration was intricate, with local officials reporting upward, but ultimately major appeals landed on the emperor's lap. The quirky tidbit. Some records hint that animals, or at least symbolic representations of them, were brought before the council to settle disputes. Say a neighbor accusing another of letting his cow eat someone else's crops. Picture yourself presiding over a trial where the main witness is chewing cud and refusing to make eye contact. Historians still argue whether Ashoka truly listened to commoners directly, or if most of these encounters were filtered through layers of bureaucracy. Some inscriptions suggest he was personally accessible, but skeptics note that a man ruling an empire of this size probably didn't have time to weigh in on every cow complaint. Still, the edicts carved on stone hint at a genuine desire to hear grievances, or at least to be seen as doing so. One after another, cases are presented. A merchant argues over rights to a trade route. A widow petitions for relief from debts. A village elder raises concerns about irrigation channels drying up. Each case brings not just facts, but human drama. The nervous pauses, the exaggerated hand gestures, the way some people try to make their issues sound more urgent by raising their voices just a notch too high. You nod. Raise your hand, occasionally ask a question. Sometimes you side with the minister's recommendation. Other times you intervene with what feels like mercy. You sense the ripple effect. Every nod you give will carry out into the villages, repeated 100 times, reshaped into stories of imperial wisdom or imperial folly. The hall grows warmer as the sun climbs. Sweat prickles under your layers of silk, and the fanning speeds up. Somewhere a child wails in the distance, a sound that reminds you this city is not all councils and decrees, but lived lives. Tangled, noisy, impossible to control. A particularly animated governor steps forward, unrolling a long scroll filled with complaints about border villages. He drones, his voice dribbling like a leaky pot, and you feel your eyelids droop. The council hall, for all its gravity, is also an endurance test. You straighten up quickly, hoping no one noticed. Ancient emperors may not have had email inboxes, but council meetings, they were the original never-ending inbox. By mid-morning, your patience is stretched thin. You've dispensed judgment, signed off on taxes, and listened to enough disputes to fill a soap opera. The hall hums with gratitude and relief, though you suspect some of the smiles are forced, hopeful that today's rulings will stick once the ministers shuffle back to their offices. You rise, signaling the session's close. The ministers bow, the petitioners shuffle out, some with joy, others muttering under their breath. The council chamber empties slowly, leaving behind only the scent of ink, sweat, and the faint tang of lotus garlands wilting under the heat. As you step out into the courtyard, sunlight hits your face, and you exhale. The weight of empire isn't in battles or banners, it's in mornings like this, where you referee land disputes and listen to complaints about irrigation channels. And somehow it feels heavier than your jewelry. The council chamber's echoes are still in your ears when the sound of horns blares from the courtyard. Short, sharp notes that signal the arrival of the military commanders. You barely have time to adjust your robes before they stride in. A parade of armor, dust, and booming voices. These are men who spend more time on elephant back than in palace halls. And they carry the weight of both conquest and logistics, like it's another sword on their hip. You settle once again on cushions, while they bow stiffly, and then launch straight into reports. The empire is vast, sprawling from Bengal to Afghanistan, and holding it together requires constant vigilance. One commander slaps a map onto the floor, pointing to northern passes where rival chieftains stir trouble. Another lists supply shortages, his tone less respectful petition and more passive-aggressive shopping list. Here's the mainstream fact. Ashoka inherited one of the largest militaries of the ancient world. His grandfather, Chandragupta, had built an army of hundreds of thousands. Infantry, cavalry, chariots, and most famously, war elephants. Those elephants weren't just battlefield weapons, but living tanks, intimidating enough to terrify opponents before a fight even began. The quirky tidbit: elephants sometimes had their tusks tipped with metal or coated in poison, turning them into literal biological weapons. Imagine trying to give a motivational speech to troops while your star elephant is busy sneezing poison-tipped snot. The commanders speak in overlapping rhythms, casual about troop numbers, grim about uprisings, animated about supply lines. One proudly announces the construction of new outposts along the western frontier. Another boasts about cavalry drills in the south. The voices are so loud you wonder if half the performance is volume. If you shout troop numbers with enough confidence, maybe no one notices the elephants ate through half the grain stockpile. Historians still argue whether Ashoka's military focus truly softened after his famous conversion to Buddhism, or if this is simply the way later chroniclers spun the story. The edicts proclaim peace and dharma, yet the infrastructure of armies remained in place. Did Ashoka become a pacifist emperor, or just a more strategic one, projecting gentleness while keeping the sword sharp behind the curtain? The reports drone on. You're told of the Navy patrolling rivers, of armor shipments delayed by monsoon floods, of deserters punished, though the punishment details are conveniently vague. You picture lines of soldiers, sweating in the heat, standing in formation while commanders bark like over-caffeinated gym instructors. Meanwhile, you're sitting here in layered silk, half listening, wondering whether you'd survive a single march through the dust. Spoiler, you probably wouldn't. One commander gestures dramatically as he describes an elephant unit that supposedly trampled an entire rebel camp. You nod politely, though part of you wonders if this is fact or just PR spin. Ancient military reports are basically the original, "We totally had them surrounded." Bro. The courtyards beyond the hall resound with distant trumpeting, real elephants penned nearby, their rumble cutting through the human chatter. You glance toward the sound, momentarily drifting. The animals are both pets and war machines, both sacred and terrifying. Their presence alone is enough to remind you how different this world is from yours. The commanders finally pause, waiting for your acknowledgement. You lift a hand. issue a few measured remarks, and the hall exhales in relief. They bow again, scrolls clutched tightly, boots clanging against stone as they retreat. What lingers afterward is not the noise, but the sense of scale. This empire isn't just rituals and silk robes. It's soldiers on distant frontiers, elephants trained for war, supply chains that stretch like veins across the land. It's power, but power that must be constantly fed, monitored, and reported on. And every booming voice you just endured was another reminder. The empire breathes not just through incense smoke, but through the march of armies. You step outside into the sunlight, ears ringing, robes heavy, and you think, in this job, even peace sounds like a military report. The military men file out, their boots echoing down the stone corridors, and in their place comes a different procession, guards dragging shackled figures, their eyes cast downward, their ankles clinking with iron. The air in the hall feels heavier, stripped of the triumphant noise of trumpeting elephants. This is the part of the day that presses against the conscience. You are about to hear cases of justice and punishment, a subject Ashoka could never escape. No matter how many times he tried to drape himself in dharma, the first prisoner kneels, back bent, voice trembling as he confesses to theft. A stolen goat, a fight in a village, a scuffle that ended badly. Ministers glance at you waiting. You sense the tension. This isn't just about the goat. It's about precedent, about how justice filters down through every corner of the empire. Your decision here will echo in other villages, other courts, shaping the way ordinary people imagine their emperor's mercy or wrath. Here's the mainstream fact. Ashoka's reign is remembered not just for conquest, but for his transformation after the brutal Kalinga War. He reportedly executed prisoners with merciless efficiency before his conversion. But afterward, he embraced policies that emphasized rehabilitation, compassion, and even the sparing of animal lives. His edicts carved on stone often spoke directly of justice and the fair treatment of subjects. Yet the quirky tidbit: punishments in ancient India could be bizarrely creative. Some texts mention fines paid in grain, exile to remote forests, or public humiliation involving donkey parades. Imagine being sentenced not to prison, but to straddle a donkey backward while the crowd jeers. Justice with a comedic twist. The guards present another prisoner accused of violence. His lip trembles as he insists he struck only in defense, while a minister unfurls a palm leaf scroll filled with accusations. The hall buzzes with murmurs, like a hive about to sting. You weigh the words, the posture, the potential ripple effects. It feels less like clear truth and more like balancing scales that never quite steady. Historians still argue whether Ashoka's justice reforms truly reached the ground level. The edicts proclaim fairness, the sparing of life, the encouragement of ethical behavior. But was this ideal consistently practiced, or was it mostly carved propaganda? The tension lingers in the gaps between lofty stone inscriptions and the lived reality of a vast, imperfect bureaucracy. As the cases continue, you can't help but feel the weight of Ashoka's own past pressing in. Before his celebrated embrace of Buddhism, he earned the nickname Ashoka, Ashoka the Cruel, due to his harsh punishments and violent campaigns. Now seated in judgment, you embody the paradox. The emperor who both ordered mass killings and preached non-violence. You deliver measured decisions. One thief fined in grain, one fighter sentenced to labor on irrigation projects rather than execution. You try to tilt toward mercy, if only to reassure yourself that transformation is possible, that cruelty can be reshaped into justice. Still, the room isn't free of shadows. You notice how guards grip their spears tighter when a prisoner pleads too loudly. You notice how ministers' eyes flick to you, trying to guess whether mercy today means leniency tomorrow. Justice here is less about law and more about theater, decisions staged for maximum symbolic effect. When the last case is heard, the prisoners are led away. Some glance back, eyes flickering with relief, others with bitterness. The hall empties slowly, leaving only the faint scrape of chains fading into the distance. You lean back, silks heavy, shoulders tense. Judging humans is harder than judging maps and armies. It gnaws at you, leaves an aftertaste. You step outside into the courtyard once more, blinking at the sunlight, hearing again the faint trumpeting of elephants from their pens. You wonder whether Ashoka, in his private thoughts, ever felt haunted by the prisoners he condemned, the blood he once spilled. Did the morning rituals wash that away, or did the memories cling like the scent of smoke in his robes? Either way, your day marches on. Justice has been dispensed, or at least performed, and the empire churns forward, waiting for its next decree. You hardly have time to exhale from the weight of prisoners' eyes before another sound creeps into the palace air. A sharp, steady chip, chip, chip. It's not drums or conch shells, it's chisels. Somewhere nearby, a team of stone carvers is already at work, etching Ashoka's words into rock that will outlast even the empire itself. You follow the sound, drawn into a courtyard where men crouch over massive slabs, mallets ringing in the rhythm of permanence. The slabs are immense, taller than men, their surfaces smoothed with care. Dust coats the workers' arms as they lean in, eyes narrowed, hands steady. Each tap sends flecks flying. The smell of crushed stone hangs in the air, gritty on your tongue. You watch as lines of Brahmi script appear, curling across the surface like vines. Ashoka's edicts, messages to the people carved not on paper that might burn or rot, but into the very bones of the earth. Here's the mainstream fact. Ashoka's rock and pillar edicts are among the earliest written records of governance in South Asia. Scattered across the subcontinent, they declared his policies of Dhamma, righteousness, compassion and non-violence, meant to reach subjects from the Himalayas to the southern seas. And here's the quirky tidbit. Some of these inscriptions were placed in areas where literacy was minimal, meaning ordinary villagers may have admired the shiny pillars without ever reading the words. It's like posting 1,000 inspirational quotes on billboards in the desert. Great for the handful who can read, baffling decoration for everyone else. The carvers work slowly, reverently. A supervisor paces behind them, comparing lines to palm leaf drafts, occasionally barking corrections. You lean closer, reading fragments. Words about kindness to animals, fairness in justice, instructions for officials to travel and hear grievances. The words feel strangely modern, as if Ashoka is trying to build a moral brand, not just an empire. Historians still argue whether the emperor actually dictated these edicts personally, or if they were crafted by advisors, polished into perfection before chiseling. Was Ashoka truly pouring out his conscience onto stone, or was this the ancient equivalent of a government press release? You glance at one pillar being polished nearby, its capital carved into 4 lions back to back, their manes stylized, their expressions regal. This will eventually become an icon of India itself, reproduced on coins, flags, and passports thousands of years later. But here in this moment, it's just dust and hammer blows, a work in progress. The sound grows hypnotic. Chip, chip, chip. You imagine being a villager stumbling upon one of these pillars in the middle of nowhere. A gleaming monolith towering above the fields, declaring that the emperor cares about your welfare, your animals, your crops. Whether or not it's true, the symbolism is undeniable. Ashoka isn't just ruling by sword and tax, he's ruling by inscription, by carving himself into memory. As the workers pause to stretch their backs, you run your fingers lightly over the grooves of half-finished letters. The stone is cool, the cuts sharp. This message will endure long after the voices of ministers fade, long after even elephants forget their training. And yet, you can't help but smirk at a thought. Somewhere down the line, some poor traveler will squint at this pillar and think, wow, another lecture about ethics. Couldn't he just keep it to one inscription? Ancient history, it turns out, had its own version of too many emails. When you step back into the palace corridor, the faint hammering still follows, like a heartbeat. Ashoka's empire is made not just of bricks and soldiers, but of words frozen in stone, declarations meant to outlive flesh. You feel the weight of that permanence pressing against your ears. The day continues, but part of you lingers with those chisels, wondering whether words carved deep enough really can reshape how people live, or if they're just echoes bouncing off stone. The chisel strikes fade into the distance, but their echo still clings to your ears as you move through another shaded hall. Here attendants roll out scrolls and speak in careful tones, not of taxes or borders this time, but of animals. Yes, animals, not hunting trophies or war elephants, but laws. You blink amused. Ashoka, the same man once nicknamed the Cruel, is now issuing edicts about goats and parrots. A minister reads aloud prohibitions on certain hunting practices, restrictions on animal sacrifice, orders that forests and groves be protected. The words sound almost tender, though the delivery is dry as dust. It's like listening to someone read bedtime stories in the style of a tax code. Here's the mainstream fact. Ashoka's edicts explicitly mention his concern for animal welfare. He banned unnecessary slaughter, restricted animal sacrifices, and promoted medical care not just for humans, but also for beasts, creating one of the earliest recorded examples of state-backed veterinary services. The quirky tidbit? Some edicts even list animals that can still be killed in a very specific menu. So you end up with laws that say, in effect, no slaughtering peacocks, parrots, or turtles, but fish and deer. Okay, fine. Imagine your government passing a decree about which snacks are off limits. Bureaucracy, meat biology. The ministers argue quietly among themselves. One insists the people will resent restrictions on their festivals, where animal offerings are tradition. Another counters that the emperor's compassion sets a moral example for the realm. A third mutters that the elephants eat more than half the tax revenue anyway. Shouldn't they be restricted? You stifle a smile. Historians still argue whether Ashoka's animal policies reflected genuine ethical transformation or were part of a broader attempt to stabilize his empire after the carnage of Kalinga. Was this the voice of a man racked by guilt, or a clever ruler using compassion as propaganda? You picture villages receiving these edicts carved on stone pillars, farmers squinting at lists of forbidden animals, priests grumbling about cancelled sacrifices, children cheering that their pet parrots are now legally safe. Meanwhile, hunters probably muttered curses and carried on with accidental kills in the forests. A law, after all, is only as strong as its enforcement, and you can't post guards in every thicket. Still, the intent is striking. The emperor of one of the largest empires in the world is telling his subjects, stop killing so much. Protect the groves. Let the parrots be. In a world where kings often proved their greatness by slaughtering ever more animals in hunts, Ashoka was trying to flip the script. As you walk past the ministers, you notice a scroll unrolled halfway down the table. It's a list of medicinal herbs and plants being distributed to villages, meant for both people and livestock. You trace the ink lines with your eyes and imagine a farmer grinding leaves to treat a cow's cough. Compassion codified into administration. And yet you can't shake the irony. Somewhere in the palace kitchens, a cook is probably roasting meat for the lunch banquet. Somewhere in the countryside, hunters are ignoring stone edicts and chasing deer. The emperor may dream of a vegetarian utopia, but the empire still runs on appetite. The ministers bow, rolling up their scrolls, their debate unresolved. You step outside again into the sunlight and hear the distant shriek of a peacock. It echoes over the courtyard, piercing and absurd, and you grin. That bird at least is safe for now, thanks to the emperor's laws. The shriek of the peacock fades, replaced by the softer hum of prayer wheels. You drift into a quieter hall where saffron banners hang limp in the still air, their edges faintly frayed. This is the part of Ashoka's day that feels more inward. His famed conversion to Buddhism, a turn so dramatic it still sparks debate centuries later. You sit on a low cushion, attendants drawing back to give space, and let your mind wander into the story everyone knows, or thinks they know. The mainstream fact, after the Kalinga War, in which more than 100,000 lives were said to be lost, Ashoka was shaken to his core. His edicts describe his sorrow at the carnage, his resolve to abandon aggressive conquest, and his embrace of Dhamma, righteousness, as taught by the Buddha. He became the archetype of the repentant king, trading swords for sermons, and yet, the quirky tidbit, some later Buddhist legends go further, claiming Ashoka not only converted, but also built 84,000 stupas across the empire to house relics of the Buddha. Historians chuckle at the number. It's clearly symbolic, like saying infinite. But imagine the construction nightmare if it were literal. Entire teams of architects running around with blueprints screaming, "We're behind on stupa number 52,817. You sit in the hall, fingers resting lightly on your knees, listening to the faint scrape of monks turning wooden wheels etched with mantras. The wheels creak softly, a rhythm like breath. A painted mural shows the Buddha beneath the Bodhi tree, serene, eyes lowered in timeless calm. You trace the outlines with your eyes, trying to reconcile this gentle image with the roaring elephants and clanging chains you witnessed earlier. Historians still argue how deep Ashoka's personal faith ran. Was his conversion a sincere spiritual awakening or a calculated strategy to stabilize a traumatized empire? His edicts are clear about sorrow and change, but edicts are also public relations carved in stone. Behind closed doors, was he truly meditating or just commissioning more pillars? You close your eyes, sinking into the imagined silence of Kalinga's battlefield. The cries of the wounded, the smoke, the rivers of blood. Then the sudden stillness that comes after, heavier than noise. You picture Ashoka standing there, realizing not victory but loss, not triumph but waste. That moment, whether it happened exactly as described or not, has become the hinge of his story, the reason you're even here now. Tracing his routine, a monk steps forward, bowing slightly, and places a small wheel of Dharma in your hands. It's carved from sandalwood, light as air, the spokes delicate under your fingertips. All things turn, the monk murmurs, his voice steady but soft, and so does the heart. You glance down at the wheel, half skeptical, half soothed. You imagine how hard it must have been for soldiers who followed Ashoka to understand the shift. One year they're conquering with elephants, the next their emperor is preaching compassion to parrots and prisoners. Change ripples outward uneven, resisted at every step. Yet here you sit, breathing incense, turning a wheel that represents the choice to change, however imperfectly. Outside, the city thrums with its usual chaos. Markets, oxen, laughter, but in this hall time slows. You breathe deeper, eyelids heavy, the painted Buddha still watching with eternal calm. And you can't help but think, History often remembers the loudest battles, but sometimes it's the quiet, the stillness afterward, that shapes the world more lastingly. You're still clutching the little wooden wheel when a rustle of saffron robes fills the doorway. A group of monks files in, their heads shaved smooth, their steps deliberate, almost floating. They carry nothing but begging bowls, yet their presence shifts the air as much as any army entering a city. You watch them settle cross-legged, their backs straight, eyes lowered. The chamber grows hushed, broken only by the faint creak of floor mats and the occasional cough from someone too human for enlightenment. The mainstream fact: Buddhist monks often visited Ashoka's court, not only to chant and advise, but also to help spread his policies of Dhamma. It was under Ashoka's patronage that Buddhism began stretching outward across Asia, carried by missions to Sri Lanka, Central Asia, and beyond. What began as small gatherings under fig trees became a global religion, in no small part because an emperor decided to lend his weight to the cause. The quirky tidbit? Monks sometimes traveled with trained parrots that could repeat simple chants. Imagine sitting in solemn meditation when suddenly a parrot squawks, Om Mani Padme Hum, in perfect timing. Was it a miracle or just the world's most pious bird? The monks begin to speak, not in loud proclamations but in measured exchanges. Questions about karma, the cycle of rebirth, the balance between kingly duty and spiritual renunciation. You find yourself leaning forward, drawn in despite the dense philosophy. One asks, can a ruler act with compassion while still ruling? Another answers, compassion without action is thought. Action without compassion is violence. The dialogue flows gentle but pointed, like a river cutting stone. Historians still argue whether Ashoka genuinely debated with monks in such intimate circles, or whether these accounts were embellished by later Buddhist chroniclers eager to present him as the perfect philosopher king. The edicts do suggest he sought spiritual counsel, but whether he sat through lengthy debates about karma while itching under his silk robe, well, that part's harder to prove. You shift slightly on your cushion, pins and needles creeping into your legs. One monk notices your discomfort and smiles faintly, as if to say, yes, suffering is universal, even in your butt. The others continue, weaving metaphors about wheels and rivers, about the futility of desire. You try to follow, but your stomach rumbles at the mention of desire, reminding you that lunch is still a few hours away. A senior monk finally closes his eyes and begins to chant. The others follow, their voices blending into a low drone that vibrates in your chest. The sound is steady, hypnotic, like bees humming in a vast hive. Your eyelids grow heavy. You imagine the sound floating over the city, slipping into alleys and markets, softening tempers, reminding people that even emperors kneel before impermanence. When the chanting ends, silence feels enormous. The monks bow, their palms pressed together, and rise with the same quiet grace with which they entered. Their saffron robes brush the floor like whispers. One leaves behind a single lotus blossom on the mat before you, white and faintly fragrant. You stare at it, absurdly touched by its simplicity. As the monks drift away, the hall breathes again. Outside you hear the clatter of carts, the chatter of traders, a child's laughter. The empire continues, noisy and impatient. But in this small chamber, a seed of stillness remains, delicate as the lotus left behind, and you can't help but chuckle softly. If the parrots ever join the chanting next time, you'll probably remember that moment more vividly than the entire sermon. The monk's chants are still humming faintly in your chest when a new sound intrudes. Sandals scraping against stone, the clink of metal clasps, the unmistakable throat clearing of people rehearsing polite phrases in a foreign tongue. You turn, and there they are, envoys from distant lands, their clothing strange, their perfumes sharper, their posture stiff with both pride and unease. The whole smells suddenly different. Instead of sandalwood and ghee smoke, there's the tang of olive oil rubbed into hair, the peppery aroma of spices not grown here, and the faint musk of leather that has traveled across deserts. You breathe, it in realizing this is what an empire feels like. Not just villages and taxis, but the collision of worlds at your doorstep. Here's the mainstream fact. Ashoka's reign coincided with lively diplomatic exchanges between India and the Hellenistic kingdoms left in the wake of Alexander the Great. Greek envoys, some from Seleucid Syria, others perhaps farther afield, visited the Mauryan court. Records mention names like Megasthenes earlier, and later Dimachus and Dionysius, foreign emissaries who left impressions of India's vast wealth and elaborate rituals. The quirky tidbit. Some sources claim these envoys struggled mightily with Indian dining customs. Imagine a Greek ambassador staring in confusion at a plate of sticky rice with his fingers poised awkwardly, muttering, "Where are the spoons?" Cross-cultural diplomacy has always had its hazards, but sticky fingers may be history's quietest battleground. The visitors bow stiffly, offering gifts. Jars of strange oils, bundles of grapevines, rolls of parchment written in alphabets curling in unfamiliar directions. In return, your attendants present bolts of silk, carved ivory, baskets of mangoes. It's less about the objects and more about the ritual exchange, everyone proving their land is cultured enough to impress the other. Historians still argue how much real power these meetings held. Were they strategic alliances, careful negotiations, about trade and borders, or more symbolic gestures meant to display grandeur? The edicts suggest Ashoka sent his own envoys abroad, spreading not just goods, but also Buddhist teachings. But whether the Greeks went home with deep respect or just sticky rice stains on their cloaks remains uncertain. You watch as translators shuffle nervously, whispering across gaps in language. One envoy gestures dramatically toward the carved pillars outside, clearly impressed or pretending to be. Another tries to compliment the local architecture, but stumbles over the word lotus, earning a chorus of muffled chuckles from ministers. Diplomacy is a dance, and half the steps involve not laughing at the wrong time. The envoys finally sit, stiff and formal, sipping cups of spiced milk with the expression of men bracing for poison. Their eyes dart toward the elephants penned in the courtyard, massive silhouettes swaying in the sunlight. You can almost hear their thoughts. How many of those things does he have? And how quickly could they trample us? For you, though, the scene is tinged with humor. You can't help picturing some poor Greek scribe back home, trying to describe all this in neat Greek prose. Yes, they eat with their fingers. Yes, their birds scream like demons. Yes, the king smells permanently of sandalwood. Good luck, friend. By the time the meeting ends, gifts have been exchanged, polite words muttered, treaties hinted at but not signed. The envoys bow again, their sandals squeaking faintly, their robes brushing the floor. As they file out, one sneaks a glance back at the lotus pillar, eyes wide. You realize that beyond all the pomp, what sticks in memory are the symbols. The lions, the wheels, the sheer strangeness of it all. When the hall empties, the air smells once again of sandalwood and rice, but you carry the sharper tang of foreign spices in your nose. You feel for a moment the empire stretching outward. Not just elephants and edicts, but conversations across deserts, mountains, and seas, and you chuckle to yourself. If diplomacy can survive sticky fingers and screaming peacocks, maybe it really can survive anything. The envoy's sandal squeaks fade down the corridor, replaced by a softer chorus. Birds calling, fountains splashing, leaves rustling in a faint breeze. You step through a carved archway and into the royal gardens, a sanctuary that feels a world away from council chambers and chiseled edicts. The sunlight here is broken into dappled patches by banyan trees, their roots twisting like ancient ropes into the soil. The air smells greener, sweeter, touched by blossoms instead of incense. The gardens stretch wide, carefully arranged but never stiff. Pathways wind like lazy rivers through groves of flowering shrubs, while ponds shimmer with lotus blooms that open their white and pink faces to the sky. Peacocks strut across the grass, tails fanned extravagantly, as if they know they're part of the show. Deer flick their ears in shaded corners, tame enough to nibble leaves near human footsteps. Here's the mainstream fact. Royal gardens in the Mauryan era weren't merely for beauty. They were experimental grounds for collecting plants from across the empire. Herbs, fruits, and flowers, arranged both for display and practical study. Ashoka's interest in medicine and his animal welfare policies extended here. The gardens were living laboratories of his philosophy. The quirky tidbit? Some chronicles suggest that peacocks were trained to parade in certain sections of the gardens at predictable times, like feathered clockwork. Imagine relying on a bird instead of a wristwatch. Oh look, it must be the second hour, the peacocks are showing off again. You stroll along a gravel path, the crunch under your sandals oddly soothing. A gardener bows as you pass, carrying a basket brimming with hibiscus flowers. Another sprinkles water from a clay pot, droplets catching sunlight like shards of glass before sinking into the thirsty soil. The rhythm of their work is unhurried, almost meditative. Historians still argue whether Ashoka truly found peace in such gardens or whether they were simply another stage for royal image building. To outsiders, these gardens would have looked like symbols of harmony, carefully curated to reflect an emperor's control over nature. Yet for someone walking them daily, they might also have been a genuine refuge from the clamor of governance. You pause at a fountain where water arcs from the mouths of carved stone lions. The spray cools your face, clinging to the perfumed oils still on your skin. Children's laughter drifts faintly from the distance, perhaps royal wards or servants' children chasing each other along the shaded paths. Their carefree noise feels like the opposite of council petitions, a reminder that life can still be simple. A gardener invites you to release a handful of flower petals into the pond. You let them scatter across the surface, where carp rise lazily to inspect the floating colors. The ripples spread outward, warping the lotus reflections until they shimmer like dreams. You sit on a stone bench, letting the hum of cicadas lull your ears. The air is heavy but soft, wrapping you in a drowsy cocoon. You find yourself musing on the contrast. In the halls, voices clamor for your decision. In the gardens, silence clings to your bones, broken only by birdsong. Power demands noise, but peace thrives in quiet corners. A peacock suddenly screams, its call startling enough to jolt you upright. You chuckle. It's hard to be fully serene when your garden includes a bird that sounds like it's being mugged. Still, the absurdity is part of the charm. As you rise to leave, the sun slants lower, gilding the edges of leaves and fountains. You take one last look at the peacocks strutting, the lotus blossoms trembling, the deer flicking their tails. The garden is both performance and paradise, and for now it has given you a breath of calm before the empire demands your attention again. From the cool hush of the gardens, you follow the echo of low rumbles and the occasional sharp trumpet. The sound grows louder as you near the stables, until the ground itself seems to vibrate. Then you see them. Elephants, vast grey mountains of flesh penned in behind heavy wooden barriers. Their trunks curl lazily through the air like living ropes, sniffing for the baskets of fruit attendants carried toward them. The scene is half chaos, half ceremony. One elephant splashes trunkfuls of water over its back, showering a handler unlucky enough to be in range. Another swings its ears like giant fans, sending dust flying. Yet despite the size and power on display, there's also a gentleness in the way they stretch out their trunks, searching delicately for mangoes and sugarcane. Here's the mainstream fact. Elephants were central to the Mauryan military machine. So valuable they were kept under strict state control. They weren't just beasts of burden. They were prestige, weapons, and living symbols of power. Ashoka's empire had thousands of them, carefully fed, trained, and housed at enormous expense. The quirky tidbit: ancient manuals on elephant care recommended treating them with regular massages, oils, and even songs to keep their tempers calm. Picture attendants crooning lullabies to a 5-ton animal that could flatten a house in a tantrum. It's the original spa package, except your client can crush you if you miss a note. You watch as handlers bring baskets forward, filled with mangoes, bananas, and stalks of fresh sugarcane. The elephants reach eagerly, curling their trunks around the food with astonishing precision. One snaps a cane stalk in half with a crack like thunder, then chews slowly, eyes half closed in what can only be described as bliss. You feel oddly jealous. Who wouldn't want breakfast delivered straight to their face by adoring attendants? Historians still argue whether Ashoka, after his Buddhist conversion, reduced the military use of elephants, or whether he simply repurposed their image into symbols of peace and majesty. His edicts talk of compassion, yet the infrastructure for elephant warfare remained. Maybe he fed them mangoes in the morning and still sent them to intimidate rebels by evening. You step closer to the enclosure, the musky smell of hay and warm animal musk thick in the air. A calf nudges its mother, squealing softly, while the older bull eyes you with a calm too deep to measure. The handlers bow, gesturing for you to toss a fruit. You hurl a mango not very gracefully, and the bull scoops it up with practiced ease. The crowd chuckles softly, and you feel for a moment less like emperor, more like a zoo visitor clumsily participating in the show. A sudden trumpet splits the air, sharp and startling. One elephant slaps its trunk against the wooden barrier, rattling the beams. The handlers rush to soothe it, singing low and stroking its ears. Slowly the giant calms, chewing again with lazy rhythm. You exhale, realizing just how thin the line is between serene spectacle and uncontrollable chaos. You linger a moment longer, listening to the crunch of sugarcane, the splash of water troughs, the occasional bass rumble of elephants conversing in sounds too deep for human ears. These creatures are both pets and engines of empire, pampered and feared, symbols of both gentleness and devastation. As you turn to leave, you brush dust from your silks and smile faintly. Feeding elephants may not solve border disputes or tax reforms, but it's undeniably grounding. And besides, watching a 5-ton animal delicately peel a banana with its trunk is the kind of image that sticks in your head far longer than a minister's speech. The heavy musk of elephants lingers in your nostrils as you're guided toward a wide, airy hall. The mood shifts again. from sacred gardens and thundering beasts to the indulgent clatter of midday banquets. Here long low tables gleam with brass plates, clay cups and steaming dishes laid out in careful order. The room hums with chatter, laughter and the occasional whoop of delight from entertainers warming up in the corner. You lower yourself onto a cushioned mat, careful not to snag your silks on the carved edges of the table. Servants glide forward with trays, sticky rice cakes sweetened with jaggery, bowls of lentil stew spiced with cumin, flatbreads brushed with ghee until they glisten, and plates of tropical fruit so colorful they look staged for a painting. The aroma makes your stomach growl, today at least. You won't be surviving on philosophical debates alone. Here's the mainstream fact. Mauryan royal meals were often vegetarian, especially after Ashoka's embrace of Buddhist principles. The dishes leaned on rice, lentils, fruits, and dairy, flavored with spices like pepper, cardamom, and cinnamon. The emphasis was nourishment without excess, though the sheer variety and abundance made even modest spreads luxurious compared to ordinary village fare. The quirky tidbit. Banquets weren't just for eating. Jugglers, acrobats, and even trained monkeys sometimes performed between courses. Picture yourself chewing rice cakes, while a fire breather casually sets his tongue ablaze a few feet away. Nothing aids digestion like the mild fear that the entertainment might set the curtains on fire. As you take your first bites, the chatter swells. Ministers lean close, gossiping about who received the choicest mangoes. Courtiers whisper about the foreign envoys still wandering the city, trying to buy silk at 3 times its worth. Musicians pluck strings in slow ragas, the notes twining lazily through the air. The whole scene feels like a cross between a conference lunch and a festival, equal parts politics and pleasure. Historians still argue whether Ashoka himself participated fully in such banquets after his turn toward simplicity. Some suggest he withdrew from extravagance, preferring quiet meals. Others insist he continued attending for appearances, his presence necessary even if his appetite waned. Either way, the palace staff didn't stop laying out the spread. You don't cancel centuries of court tradition overnight. You sip cool buttermilk, its tang cutting through the richness of spiced lentils. Servants circulate with platters of rice cakes, sticky and sweet, their texture gluing your teeth together in a way that makes you wonder how many royal decrees were delayed by sticky-mouth pauses. Across the room, jugglers toss torches in smooth arcs, flames reflecting in the polished brass of cups. You clap politely, chewing slowly, trying not to choke on rice while the torches spin. The meal stretches long, the pace unhurried. Conversations meander from policy to gossip to jokes at the expense of absent nobles. A child's laughter rings out as one of the trained monkeys capers across the mats, snatching a grape before a handler scoops it up. Even emperors, it seems, aren't immune to slapstick during lunch. By the time your plate is cleared, your stomach is pleasantly heavy and your head fogged with the warmth of spices and the drone of music. You lean back, silk rustling, and let your gaze wander across the hall. Ministers grinning, performers bowing, peacocks strutting just outside in the gardens. For a moment, the empire feels less like an endless machine of reports and edicts, and more like a great household, noisy, colorful, absurd. As you rise, attendants rush forward with damp cloths to wipe your hands. The scent of cardamom clings to your breath. The sweetness of jaggery lingers on your tongue, and the faint sound of jugglers' applause follows you out into the sunlight. You can't help but think, lunchtime in Ashoka's court is proof that even the most righteous empire needs a sticky rice break. The hall of banquets dissolves behind you, its noise and spice replaced by a hush padded with whispers and silk. You enter the women's quarters, a part of the palace few outside eyes ever saw. The air feels different here, cooler, perfumed not with incense but with rosewater, and the faint powdery scent of cosmetics. Light filters through patterned screens, scattering into delicate lattices across the floor. You tread softly, because the soundscape is softer too. Muffled laughter, the faint jingle of anklets, the creak of wicker fans swaying overhead. Silk curtains ripple in the cross breeze, their folds hiding and revealing fragments of the world within. This is no council chamber, no military parade. This is a realm of cushions, gossip, and carefully layered influence. Here's the mainstream fact. Mauryan palaces had large harems or women's quarters, not only for royal wives but also attendants, entertainers, and female relatives. They weren't simply ornamental. Many wielded subtle power through family networks and quiet persuasion. Ashoka's own mother, Subhadrangi, was remembered as a significant influence in his early life. And now for the quirky tidbit, some texts suggest that women in royal harems competed in board games like chaturanga, a precursor to chess, sometimes betting jewelry or embroidered cloth. Picture rows of noblewomen squinting over boards, muttering strategies, and occasionally tossing a bangle onto the pile when their queen fell. You step past a screen and see clusters of women lounging on cushions, their silks vivid with dyes that shimmer like beetle wings. Some braid each other's hair, weaving in flowers. Others hum tunes that slip lazily into the air. A pair of younger attendants giggle as they test perfumes on their wrists, waving the scents under each other's noses like amateur perfumers. Historians still argue whether Ashoka himself visited these quarters regularly after embracing Buddhism. Did he retreat from indulgence, or did he maintain appearances in the palace traditions? The records are silent, leaving us with conjecture balanced precariously on gossip. A matronly figure rises to greet you, her bracelets chiming with every movement. She offers a dish of sweetened betel nut, wrapped in glossy green leaf. You accept politely, chewing as the bitterness and spice spark across your tongue. Around you, conversations swirl, some trivial about fabrics and jewels, others edged with politics. One woman mentions a cousin petitioning for land. Another muses about the emperor's latest edict on animal welfare. It's clear, influence doesn't stop at the council hall. It flows here too, in laughter and suggestion, in who whispers into whose ear. Children dart through the room, weaving between cushions, their giggles punctuating the otherwise languid atmosphere. One tugs at your robe, curious about the heavy necklace glittering on your chest. You bend slightly, letting tiny fingers brush against the cool metal. The room chuckles softly at the sight, the emperor reduced to jewelry stand. A lute begins to play in the background, its notes light and teasing. A young woman sings, her voice weaving through the air, playful more than solemn. The melody drifts like a breeze, making your eyelids heavy, your shoulders loosen. The women sway gently, some tapping fingers against their knees. It's hypnotic, less performance and more shared mood. You sit back against the cushions, letting the silk embrace your skin, aware of watchful eyes behind the laughter. For all the softness here, there's also scrutiny. Every gesture, every word ripples outward. In this room, where laughter hides strategies and games mask ambition, you understand why emperors tread carefully, and yet in this moment with rosewater on the air, music humming and giggles rising like birdsong, you let yourself drift. Governance can wait an hour. For now, you're simply a guest in the soft labyrinth of silks and whispers. Leaving the women's quarters feels like stepping out of a perfumed dream. The air beyond is plainer, drier, buzzing with cicadas and the faint shouts of servants in the courtyards. Your body, weighed down with food and silks, suddenly longs for stillness. Attendants guide you toward a shaded pavilion, where mats are spread across the floor in careful symmetry. The faint smoke of incense curls upward, and a low hum of chanting drifts in like a tide. You lower yourself onto a mat, legs folding into a cross-legged posture that feels noble for about 30 seconds before your knees start to complain. The monks who remain in the palace are already seated, eyes half closed, breathing slow as river water. You close your eyes too, willing yourself into their rhythm. Here's the mainstream fact. Meditation was integral to Buddhist practice, and Ashoka is often portrayed as encouraging it, both in his own life and among his subjects. His edicts mention Dhamma not only as law but as practice. Quiet reflection, compassion, patience. It was philosophy lived in daily habit, not just carved in stone. The quirky tidbit. Some ancient manuals recommended reciting mantras while swatting mosquitoes, a way of turning irritation into spiritual practice. Imagine chanting, "All beings deserve compassion," while simultaneously smacking your arm every 30 seconds. Enlightenment. With mosquito bites as your study companions, you breathe in, out. The air is thick, and the heat wraps you like a damp blanket. Sweat trickles down your temples, and mosquitoes buzz in your ears, insistent as ministers at council. One lands on your wrist and you hesitate. Strike it down or let it bite in the name of compassion. You decide to brush it off gently, muttering in your head, "Go annoy someone else." Little reincarnated cousin. Historians still argue whether Ashoka himself meditated regularly, or if such moments were more symbolic demonstrations for visitors and monks. Was he truly still inside, or was his mind as restless as yours, flitting between troop reports, banquets, and the itch behind his left knee? The records don't say, leaving you to wonder if kings find inner peace more easily, or if power only makes the silence louder. Around you, the chanting deepens. The monks' voices blend into a single low note, steady as earth. You try to follow, your chest vibrating faintly, but your throat catches halfway, more cough than mantra. No one scolds you. The practice here is gentle, forgiving, even for emperors who can't carry a tune. Time stretches. A breeze sneaks through the latticed windows, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the gardens. Your breathing slows, heavy eyelids droop. Thoughts of soldiers, elephants, ministers drift away like clouds, thin and dissolving. For a moment you touch stillness, a pause between pulses of empire. Then a mosquito lands squarely on your nose. You twitch, breaking the spell, earning a faint chuckle from a monk across the mat. You grin sheepishly and the chant resumes, steady, unshaken. When the session ends, you bow your head. The monks rise gracefully, but you unfold your legs with less elegance, wincing as blood rushes back into them. Still you feel lighter, as if you've put down a burden, even if only for half an hour. Stepping out into the afternoon sun, the world feels louder, sharper, but your breath is steady, anchored. You walk on, silks clinging to your back, faintly amused that one mosquito has reminded you. Enlightenment may be eternal, but bodies are stubbornly mortal. The afternoon sun glares off the palace walls, making every stone seem to shimmer. You shield your eyes as attendants lead you toward the outskirts of the city, where scaffolding rises like skeletal forests. Hammers clink, saws rasp, ropes creak, the unmistakable din of construction. Here the empire builds not for battle, but for memory. Half-finished stupas loom in the dust, domes swelling upward, their surfaces raw and unpolished, waiting for the labor of hundreds more hands. You pause to take it all in. Workers balance precariously on bamboo scaffolds, hauling baskets of stone chips on their heads. The smell of wet plaster mixes with the metallic tang of chisels. Foremen shout directions above the noise, their voices hoarse but commanding. The air tastes of grit, each breath carrying a hint of pulverized stone. Here's the mainstream fact. Ashoka's reign saw an unprecedented wave of Buddhist architecture. Stupas, monasteries and pillars stretching across the empire. These weren't small shrines tucked away in forests. They were massive state projects meant to proclaim his patronage of Buddhism and root the Dhamma in the very landscape. The quirky tidbit. Sound legends claim that relics of the Buddha were divided and enshrined in many of these stupas. Whether or not every site truly housed a relic, workers sometimes buried curious trinkets inside. Seals, coins, charms, turning construction sites into accidental treasure vaults. Imagine future archaeologists scratching their heads over someone's lucky bead hidden under tons of stone. You walk closer, sandals crunching on gravel. One stupa dome rises so large it already casts its own shade, though scaffolding still clings to its sides like a spider's web. Workers carve stone railings with lotus motifs, while others in the distance stack bricks into orderly spirals. Every strike of the hammer echoes like a heartbeat, steady and relentless. Historians still argue whether Ashoka's architectural explosion was purely religious devotion or also political theater. Was he genuinely moved to spread the Buddha's relics, or did he see stupas as monuments to imperial unity, as visible proof of his benevolence? The debate lingers, but in the end you realize sincerity and propaganda aren't always opposites. They often coexist. A foreman beckons you toward a partially completed gateway. It's an elaborate arch, carved with elephants, lions, and mythical beasts. You run your hand along the rough edges, feeling the cool stone bite your fingertips. Somewhere an artisan chips away at the image of a wheel, each spoke slowly taking shape. The sound rings steady, like time itself turning in rhythm with the chisel. Dust coats your robes, sweat beads on your forehead. You envy the workers their simpler cotton wraps as you swelter in silk. But even discomfort can't erase the awe of standing amid so much ambition. The scale is staggering. Not one monument, but dozens scattered across the empire, each a promise in stone. Here lived a ruler who sought to etch compassion into the earth. Nearby, a worker pauses, shading his eyes, and laughs softly as a monkey scrambles up the scaffolding, stealing a lump of plaster. The whole crew groans, shaking fists, but no one chases. The monkey is already gone, scampering along the half-built dome. For a moment, even the emperor shares their grin. You turn to leave as the afternoon heat thickens. Behind you, the scaffolding creaks, hammers strike, voices rise. Ahead lies the palace once more, quieter, cooler, but carrying the echo of these projects. Each stone set today will stand long after your robes are dust. And as you walk away, you can't help but think, legacy doesn't always roar like an elephant. Sometimes it just hums like a chisel on stone, steady, ordinary, unending. By the time you return from the dusty stupa sites, the air has shifted. The sun leans lower, throwing long shadows across the courtyards, and the palace hums with a new kind of murmur, quieter but edged with tension. You follow the sound into a shaded veranda where nobles sit in tight clusters, voices low, brows furrowed. The topic, you quickly realize, is hunting, or more precisely, the lack of it. Here's the mainstream fact. After Ashoka's embrace of Buddhism, royal hunts, once grand spectacles of power, were severely restricted. He issued edicts discouraging slaughter for sport, urging compassion toward animals, and even banning the killing of certain species outright. For a court raised on the thrill of royal chases, this was a seismic shift. The quirky tidbit. In some traditions, nobles were allowed to stage mock hunts where animals weren't harmed. Men on horseback chasing goats with bells tied to their tails, a farcical parody of the old grandeur. Imagine the most powerful aristocrats in the land, galloping after jingling livestock while trying to look dignified. Spoiler, they didn't. You listen from your seat as nobles whisper complaints. One insists that hunting sharpened warriors kept them ready for battle. Another mutters that the emperor's new compassion leaves their traditions hollow, their prestige weakened. A third complains outright about boredom. What is the point of being noble, he sighs, if one cannot chase a lion now and then? Historians still argue how strictly Ashoka enforced his anti-hunting policies. Did he truly abolish hunts altogether? Or did he allow exceptions in practice, quietly tolerating what he condemned in stone? Some inscriptions thunder with righteousness, but enforcement in a realm this vast was uneven at best. You can almost taste the conflict in the air. To the nobles, hunting isn't just blood sport. It's identity, status, and ritual. To the emperor, it has become the opposite, a symbol of cruelty, of the old ways he's sworn to transcend. Between those poles, an uneasy silence stretches. A minister clears his throat, trying to lighten the mood with a story of a deer that wandered right into the palace gardens, spared, and now practically tame. Some chuckle, others roll their eyes. You suppress a grin, imagining nobles staring glumly at a deer eating roses, while remembering the days when such a sight meant a chase. The debate grows weary, looping through the same arguments. Compassion versus tradition, dharma versus pride. You let it roll over you like background noise, your mind drifting. Out beyond the palace, the forest waits, alive with boars, peacocks, and lions that no longer hear the thunder of royal hunts. Perhaps the animals themselves hold a different council at dusk, puzzled by their sudden reprieve. As the conversation dwindles, nobles rise reluctantly, their silks rustling with irritation. Some bow stiffly, others mutter into their beards. You watch them leave, knowing the tension isn't resolved. Compassion may be carved into stone, but old instincts linger in bones and blood. The sun dips lower, staining the sky orange. The forest beyond Pataliputra glows with firelight through the trees. You step out into the courtyard, feeling the weight of the debate settle in your chest. Mercy has its price, and peace is never simple. And you can't help but think, if you tried replacing modern sports with mock versions, say, running in circles with a foam ball, fans today would probably revolt too. History doesn't change appetite so easily. The hunting debate dissolves into dusk, replaced by the swelling pulse of drums. You're lifted onto a palanquin, its wooden frame creaking as attendants hoist you onto their shoulders. The procession begins, winding through the capital as the sun sinks low. The air is thick with dust kicked up by the crowd, glowing golden in the last light. The streets are alive. Merchants leave their stalls to watch, children dart between legs, and women lean from latticed balconies to glimpse the emperor's progress. Drums pound in a steady rhythm, joined by the piercing wail of flutes and the deeper boom of conch shells. The sound vibrates in your chest, matching the sway of the litter as it moves. Here's the mainstream fact. Royal processions were crucial to Mauryan political theatre. The emperor didn't just rule from within palace walls. He showed himself to the people, embodying order, wealth, and divine sanction in motion. Processions reinforced loyalty, reminding everyone that the empire wasn't a rumor. It had a face. And the quirky tidbit? Some accounts suggest elephants in the procession were painted in bright pigments, reds, yellows, blues, transforming them into walking murals. Imagine massive creatures lumbering down the street, looking like psychedelic parade floats. Effective spectacle, questionable fashion statement. As your palanquin sways, you glimpse the details. Garlands draped over doorways, oil lamps flickering to life, incense smoke curling upward. The scent of frying sweets wafts from a stall, making your stomach grumble again despite the banquet earlier. The people cheer softly, not wild or unruly, but rhythmic, almost reverent, hands pressed together, voices chanting blessings. Historians still argue whether Ashoka's processions became less militaristic after his conversion. Early rulers paraded soldiers and weapons. Later, Ashoka's spectacles may have leaned more towards symbols of peace, monks, animals, banners of Dharma. The sources blur, leaving us to imagine processions where sword-bearing guards marched alongside saffron-robed monks. You spot a group of children waving palm leaves in unison, their voices rising above the crowd. A dog barks frantically, chasing the shadow of your litter, until its owner scoops it up with an apologetic bow. The absurd and the sacred mingle in the streets, and you find yourself smiling at both. The procession winds past stone pillars carved with edicts, their words glinting faintly in torchlight. Villagers point to them, murmuring, as if the stone itself is nodding in agreement with your passing. Above, the sky deepens into indigo, stars pricking through, while the last flare of sunset lingers red at the horizon. The palanquin rocks steadily, almost soothing now, like being rocked in a cradle by the rhythm of the city itself. The drums slow, then quicken, then slow again, setting the tempo of your heartbeat. You feel the paradox, emperor and passenger, ruler and carried weight, lofty symbol and fragile body swaying with every step. As you near the palace gates once more, the music reaches its crescendo. Trumpets blare, drums roll, torches flare high. The crowd presses close, then slowly ebbs as guards usher them back. By the time the palanquin lowers with a final thud onto the courtyard stones, night has fully claimed the city. You step down, legs stiff, ears ringing, heart oddly light. The procession has ended, but its echo will linger in the streets, in the murmurs of children who whisper to each other that they saw the emperor tonight. And you can't help but think, in another age, this would be a televised broadcast. Instead, it's 1,000 dusty feet, painted elephants, and the beating heart of drums echoing into the dark. The drums of the procession still reverberate in your bones as you step into a quieter hall of the palace. Night has settled fully now, the air cooler carrying the faint hum of crickets outside. Servants glide about with trays, setting down bowls and cups for the emperor's evening meal. After the spectacle of drums and painted elephants, dinner feels more like a soft exhale, a winding down of the day. You lower yourself onto a cushion at a low table. Before you, steaming bowls of lentil broth glimmer in the lamplight, their surfaces dotted with oil and spiced with cumin. Clay cups hold cool water flavored with tamarind. Platters of simple bread and bowls of boiled vegetables are arranged in neat order, humble compared to the midday banquet. Here's the mainstream fact. Ashoka, especially in his later years, reportedly embraced simpler meals, in keeping with Buddhist ideals of moderation. Rice, vegetables, pulses, and fruits dominated his diet, though the variety still reflected imperial abundance compared to what ordinary villagers ate. The quirky tidbit? Some records suggest he kept royal tasters even after adopting simplicity, just in case someone thought lentil soup was a good vehicle for poison. Imagine the awkwardness. Taste this plain broth to see if it kills you. A low-budget thriller disguised as dinner. You sip the broth slowly, its warmth sliding down your throat, the spices faint but grounding. Around you, ministers lean closer, their tones subdued now that the weight of the day is fading. The gossip continues, of course, it always does. Someone murmurs about a new tax proposal, Another chuckles about a courtier's disastrous attempt to ride an elephant sideways, but the sharp edges are gone, softened by food, by fatigue, by night. Musicians sit cross-legged in a corner, plucking slow ragas on lutes. The sound is less about performance and more about atmosphere, a low drone that settles into your bones. The notes vibrate against the lamplight, the rhythm as steady as your own breathing. Historians still argue whether these dinners served as genuine moments of rest for Ashoka, or if even here politics lingered, woven into every bite and every whisper. The truth likely lies in between, food soothing the body while conversation still tugged at the edges of empire. You reach for bread, tearing it with your fingers, dipping it into the broth. The texture is rougher than the soft rice cakes from earlier, but satisfying. Ministers talk, musicians play, servants refill cups, and the room hums in a rhythm of routine. You lean back slightly, the day's weight finally beginning to ease. Outside, a peacock cries once, its shriek startling, absurd in the hush. You chuckle under your breath. Even at night, the bird insists on being part of the story. One minister glances at you, confused by your amusement, and you wave him off with a small smile. Not everything requires an imperial explanation. By the time the bowls are emptied and the music drifts into silence, you feel heavier, calmer, the spices still lingering on your tongue. The lamps flicker lower, their flames bowing to the dark. You rise, silks whispering, and the hall empties slowly around you. Dinner is done. Politics may not be over, but for tonight, they've been softened by broth, by music, by the steady pulse of the empire exhaling into night. And you can't help but think, if tomorrow brings more councils, elephants and peacocks, at least you'll face it on a full stomach. Dinner leaves your body warm, your eyelids heavy, but the day isn't done. Attendants guide you toward an open courtyard, where the night sky spreads wide, jeweled with stars. The air is cooler now, carrying the earthy scent of damp soil and faint trails of smoke from distant hearths. A circle of priests and attendants waits, oil lamps flickering in their hands, ready for the final rituals of the evening. You lower yourself onto a mat, the stone, cool beneath the woven fibers. Priests begin to chant, their voices rising and falling like waves, the rhythm slower than the monk's earlier drone, but no less hypnotic. The mantras are old, older than the empire itself, syllables that have rolled off tongues for centuries. You bow your head, and the cadence washes over you, steady, soothing, almost like a lullaby. Here's the mainstream fact. Mauryan kings observed night rituals that blended Vedic traditions with newer Buddhist practices. Offerings to protective deities, invocations for safe sleep, and acts of remembrance for ancestors formed part of the nightly routine. Even as Ashoka leaned toward Buddhism, he didn't erase older customs. He folded them into the rhythm of court life. The quirky tidbit. Some rituals included tying protective amulets around the wrist before sleep, often stuffed with odd ingredients, herbs, beads, even scraps of animal bone. Imagine trying to drift off while wondering if the lumpy pouch tied to your arm might leak powdered owl claw. Spiritual comfort, with a side of paranoia. The oil lamps crackle faintly, casting halos on the priests' faces. They wave incense in slow circles, and smoke rises like pale rivers into the starry dark. You catch the faint scent of sandalwood and resin, clinging to your nose, sinking into your silks. A conch shell sounds once, low and resonant, carrying far into the night. The echo lingers, as if the sky itself is answering. Historians still argue whether Ashoka himself knelt with full sincerity each night, or whether he sometimes let the priests perform the rituals while he drifted into thought. Was the emperor always present in spirit, Or did routine eventually dull devotion? No one can say, though the continuity of the ritual suggests their importance. Even if practiced half-drowsy, as the chants slow, a priest steps forward with a small bowl of water, sprinkling a few drops over your head. Another presents a garland of fresh flowers, pressing it lightly into your hands before laying it on the altar. The gestures are small but deliberate, symbolic acknowledgements that even emperors end their days by seeking peace from something beyond themselves. Above, the stars blaze more clearly now, constellations wheeling silently across the black. You tip your head back, staring upward. The Milky Way stretches faintly, like a river of light mirrored by the darker Ganges flowing unseen outside the palace walls. Somewhere out there, villagers are sleeping under the same stars, dreaming simpler dreams. The chants fade into silence. The lamps gutter low. A breeze sighs through the courtyard, carrying with it the distant bark of a dog, the rustle of trees, the occasional trill of a night bird. You rise slowly, body stiff, mind oddly clear. The night rituals are done. Tomorrow will bring its own burdens, but for now the empire sleeps, or tries to. You step back through the palace corridors, the hush of the courtyard lingering in your ears. A fragile cocoon of calm stretched thin across the restless city, and you think, with a faint smile, no matter how many lamps are lit, stars still outshine them all. The palace is hushed now, corridors dim to the glow of single lamps. Servants pad softly, their voices lowered as if afraid to disturb the thick quiet of midnight. You pass into the sleeping chamber, where a broad wooden bed waits, draped with cotton sheets light enough for the humid air. The silks you've worn all day slide off your shoulders, replaced by a simpler wrap. Finally, after a cycle of councils, edicts, elephants, and endless rice cakes, you can let your body sink down. The room smells faintly of jasmine. Outside, crickets thrum, a steady background hum that mixes with the low crackle of the last oil lamp. You stretch out on the mattress, bones sighing with relief, and close your eyes. Here's the mainstream fact: Ashoka's later years were said to be restless ones. Though he preached peace, he also wrestled with memory, the blood of Kalinga, the resistance of nobles, the never-ending tide of governance. Ancient texts describe his attempts to find calm in nightly rituals, in Buddhist recitation, in the rhythm of sleep itself. The quirky tidbit: some traditions claim Ashoka's dreams were prophetic, visions of lions, wheels, or even entire stupas rising from the earth. Whether those were divine messages or the result of eating too much spiced milk before bed is anybody's guess. Historians still argue whether these dream stories reflect reality or were later inventions, embroidered to make him appear more saintly. But the image endures, an emperor haunted not by enemies but by visions in the dark. You breathe deeper, sinking further into the cotton. Images flicker behind your eyelids. Stone pillars glowing in moonlight. Elephants crunching sugarcane, painted envoys fumbling with sticky rice. Monks chanting while parrots squawk in counterpoint. They blend, surreal and soft, until even the weight of empire loosens its grip. And then, like anyone else, you dream. Not as emperor, not as symbol, but as a body finally surrendered to sleep. And now, as the story fades, let yourself sink more deeply into your own quiet. The world of councils and pillars, of elephants and incense, of mango feasts and whispered debates, has dissolved like dust carried off by the evening breeze. What remains is only calm, wide and steady. Picture the palace gardens at night. The fountains have fallen silent. The peacocks tucked their feathers into silence, and even the monkeys have curled in branches, their chatter stilled. The air is cool, sweet with the faint memory of flowers, and above stretches a sky so vast it seems endless, jeweled with stars that blink softly, patient and unhurried. Your breath slows, in and out, like the river you waded into at dawn. Each inhale draws in the hush of the courtyard. Each exhale releases the weight of the day. There is no council here, no ministers, no prisoners or nobles debating the thrill of hunts. Just the rhythm of night, steady as a lullaby. Feel your body loosen into the mattress the way Ashoka's must have, after long days of judgment and ritual. Shoulders soften, arms grow heavy, legs drift into stillness. Even your thoughts grow lighter, slipping further apart, like petals floating on quiet water. The oil lamps gutter lower. The last echoes of chanting fade into memory. The empire sleeps, and so do you, wrapped in the same silence that once cradled emperors and beggars alike, under the same patient sky. So rest now. Let the story dissolve completely. Let the hum of the night, whether from a fan, a breeze, or your own heartbeat, carry you gently into dreams. Sweet dreams, traveler.